They thought the nightmare was dead and buried. They were wrong. Jason lives. Happy Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, Part 6. Jason Lives, rated R.
Starts Friday, August 1st at a theater near you.
Hey everyone, and thank you once again for tuning in to the Pod and the Pendulum, your horror movie podcast that does deep dives into franchises, one movie in one episode at a time. So before we dive into tonight's episode here, a couple quick things. First, we are super excited to bring you this quick little interview we got to do with Tom McLoughlin, director of Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6, in which he breaks some really interesting news towards the end of the interview, which sounded a little bit like a throwaway, but could potentially be some very cool news for any fans of Friday the 13th, which, if you're listening to this, my guess is you probably are. Second, our guest this week is AJ Bowen. You have probably seen him in things like You're Next, A Horrible Way to Die, and also movies that I really love like Maidenhead and House of the Devil. He is one of the stars of the new indie hit I Trapped the Devil. We had some technical issues as we recorded this week. It seemed like AJ's Bluetooth headphones were causing a little bit of feedback whenever Jerry or I would speak. That's the bad news. The good news is, one of the best parts of having AJ on the show is you just say a couple words and let him go. It was pretty fantastic. He's been one of my favorites for a long time, and he does all the heavy lifting for us on this episode, so you won't hear, hopefully, too much of that overall. It's a very different episode. The other technical thing we ran into is your idiot host, Mike, that would be me, forgot to hit the record button for the start of the program when we were recording with AJ. So, we started over again, and we got a little bit slap happy and giggly. So when you hear that portion of the interview, it kind of dives right in, and it sounds like we're having a little bit of a tickle fest, to be quite honest. So not quite the same smooth professional opening I'm sure you've all grown so accustomed to. And yes, I'm being a little bit sarcastic and self-depreciating with that. So without any further ado, we present you our interview with Tom McLoughlin, followed by our analysis of Jason Lives with AJ Bowen. So, hey everyone, thank you once again for joining the Pod and the Pendulum. We are here actually this week to talk about Jason Lives, and you know what? I think we're just going to dive right into it because we have a very special guest right now. We have the director of Jason Lives with us, Tom McLoughlin. Tom, how are we doing tonight?
Doing fine, you guys. How about you?
We are doing great, and of course we're here with Jerry. Jerry, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk to Tom about this. So yeah, let's just jump right in. Let's get into it.
Yeah, we'll get the niceties are out of the way. So, first thing, I think the most important thing, Tom, I kind of want to know is where do you stand in the whole, is a hot dog a sandwich or not a sandwich debate?
That's having just had a hot dog tonight for dinner, it's really, actually a vegan hot dog, no less. So I don't know where that falls into what category that is, but I don't know. I think a sandwich is still, with Wonder Bread and mayonnaise and bologna, and that's a sandwich. Anything else is a burger or a dog.
There we go.
So
I agree.
We can now continue with this interview. Otherwise, I was going to hang up in disgust if we were to call it a sandwich. So good to know we're on the same page. Actually, one question I did have before we dive deep into the movie, reading that you have like a training in basically training to be a mime at one point, and your dad was a performer as well. I was kind of wondering how that influenced the way you had CJ move as Jason Voorhees in the film.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's hard in any of these things that I've done where there's physical comedy involved, or even just something that requires a bit of, communicating, non-verbally. That all of that, both the training and the study, because so much of my, best education came from watching the films of Buster Keaton and obviously Charlie Chaplin and all the silent great movie stars that you really kind of got down what that is to do things without words and let the audience kind of figure out what's going on in the character's head. So yeah, there was a number of things where CJ just kind of followed a basic instruction of how to do that. But being a former Marine, he had brought to the table that Terminator approach, which I thought was particularly cool.
One thing that I've always been interested in and just kind of enthralled by is the fact that CJ kind of came into the film later on. I mean, you started filming it with Dan Bradley, right?
Right, exactly.
And when it came to like the approach, I mean, already having your Jason ready to go and Dan Bradley filming like the paintball scenes and all that stuff. After knowing that, you could kind of tell that there is slight differences. I'm curious, did your approach change when, CJ came into the picture?
Yeah, it did. I mean, just because they're two completely different, both body types and way of moving, where they're kind of like where their center of balance is. And, Dan was much more in that sort of, lunging forward, that kind of stalking, heavy-footed type approach. CJ was much more straight up, as I said, kind of like a Terminator, unstoppable, and that he's almost like a Walking Dead machine. And I never thought of him as a zombie. The whole time I'm doing this, I always thought, well, I need to bring back Jason. Let's go old school and do it with electricity like Frankenstein. And and once that has happened, you're sort of free with what you can do with the movements and things. But Dan came, with the package of being both the stunt coordinator as well as playing Jason, and it was such a short amount of time that all that was really there was the paintball thing, and then CJ stepped in when we did the tearing the arm off of the the Mr. Macho thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting how different Jason Lives was from A New Beginning. I mean, it went from full on kind of like sleazy 42nd Street vibe of A New Beginning to full on, universal monster greatness of Jason Lives. Was that intentional, and was that kind of part of the dialogue that you had with Mancuso and everyone?
Basically, I was really blessed in that Frank gave me pretty much total control on this, what I wanted to write and then how I was going to direct it and things. The only marching orders were, he said, we screwed up on part 5 and the audience didn't want to see somebody else playing Jason. They want Jason. And so the tone of that movie and things really kind of came from, Danny Steinman, the director, whose background was in those types of movies. And that's, kind of what he brought to the table. When I came in, I basically said, well, I want to add some humor and I want to, bring things that are a little more movie-ish, much more of a kind of a classic Hollywood storytelling thing, and also have the characters be people you like, as opposed to, you could hardly wait to see them get killed, and really try to, do things where, Jason had an agenda, Tommy had an agenda, and it was a question of who was going to win out at the end. So that's a little more traditional storytelling in that regard.
This might be an odd question, but when I watch Friday the 13th, I think of like traditional pro wrestling booking, and that you have your two characters have a
Yeah.
conflict in the beginning, you keep them apart throughout the whole movie, and then they come together at the end for their final conflict. Like, what sort of other kind of like, there's like so much pop culture in your movie, more so than any other Friday the 13th. I think of like the American Express card that's in there. What sort of like pop culture did you want to infuse into the film when you were coming up with Jason Lives?
I have to say it was totally, most of it unintentional. It just is kind of what came out. I did a treatment first, and just kind of like just let myself go and did this treatment, and the treatment is what I handed in, and immediately Frank said, "Love it. Let's go to script." So again, it was me spending some more time in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where I was, writing a lot of this, which was right next door to Paramount. And I've got that, that quirky side of me that loves, creating in unusual places. And that certainly was kind of apropos, both for me having made my first movie there, One Dark Night, and then just, having that sort of, it's so tranquil and, let my head go wherever it went. So a lot of stuff just came in because I was a guy that did a lot of comedy. I also loved to, make jokes where the audience provided the punchline, like the, American Express thing, where there would always be somebody that would yell from the audience, "Don't leave home without it." And I just, went to so many horror movies, and the 80s were a great time for audience participation. So many things were sort of designed with, I'd love to see somebody come back, with some line when this moment happens. So that was obviously conscious. But yeah, many things just kind of was what stream of consciousness or whatever kind of came out as I was writing.
So it
Were
sounds.
you nervous? Go ahead. That's
No,
good.
you, Jerry, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, were you ever nervous about adding that humor and self-awareness to it? I mean, the past films, they had kind of comic relief here and there, but a lot of them tend to be somewhat cynical feeling. Whereas Jason Lives, I mean, it is so much fun right from the first frame. Were you ever nervous kind of about injecting that into the series?
I wasn't nervous. I was terrified. I really thought the fans were going to hate it. I thought, I'm really risking crossing that line of putting kind of, satiring, the whole slasher genre on one hand, and then, adding those moments like, Jason walking through the circle like James Bond and slashing. And I mean, were they going to go for that? Or is this like not the way you want to see Jason interpreted? And then many of the other things that, with the sense of humor and breaking the fourth wall and basically telling the audience, some folks have a strange idea of entertainment. And, the first thing that worried me is we actually got good reviews from a lot of the hardcore, bigger critics. And they were saying, gee, I can't hate a movie like this, despite it's a despicable subject, when it is making fun of itself as it's happening. So I thought, well, is there going to be a backlash to that with the fans not liking it? But we were all, really, really happy with the reactions that it was getting in the theater. But our box office was hurt considerably by how many people didn't want to even go to another Friday. It was going to be Tommy Jarvis playing, Jason and not really Jason. So it's only over the last 30-something years that it's, really kind of risen up as a lot of people's favorite. And you kind of hit on it. I wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to be a roller coaster ride. I wanted you to, one moment, have a jump scare, and the next moment just really love being with this particular character, or finding Megan sexy, and, whatever, car chase, underwater fight, and then put real children in there, which nobody had done. And, let them think, oh my God, they're not going to kill kids, are they? So, I just wanted to put a lot of different things in that hopefully the audience would like, but I really wasn't sure if the fans were going to dig it.
What do you think it was about that particular moment in time that made you say, like, okay, it's a little scary to change the character so much and interject this humor, but we think the time is right? What jumped out to you as it being the right moment to do it?
Purely because when I got the job, I had only seen part one, which I liked very much. I loved the whole twist, being the mother and things when I saw that. Then you got to realize I was a young filmmaker in Hollywood trying to get a job, and I loved horror movies and I loved comedies. And anytime a horror movie came up, it was going to be another variation of a slasher. Put a bag over his head, put a sock on him, do something where it's still, a guy head covered in the forest, bunch of kids that you don't care about get killed. So when I was offered it, I thought, okay, I got to see all the other ones and see if there's some sort of mythology or something I can do with it. So I sat in the Paramount screening room and watched part one all the way up through part 5 and went, okay, I get what everybody else has done. Now to do a part 6, are we serious here? Do I approach this in any kind of serious fashion? And that voice in my head said, no, you got to have some fun with it and kind of let that be the one that does a bit of a turn. And much to my shock, jumping forward, I was sent a script called Scary Movie by Kevin Williamson, and I read it and I went, no, I've already done this. I turned it down. And then after I read a bunch of shitty scripts, I went back to my agent and I said, what happened to that Scary Movie script? He goes, no, Wes Craven got it. I went, oh, okay, well, whatever.
So
but
great
then
what
when
if.
I met Kevin Williamson, many years later, he said, I got to tell you, your Friday had a lot of influence on, Scream. And I said, really? I love hearing that because I turned down Scream. So.
Oh, that's great. You have such a musical background. I mean, and you're still going with that. I'm curious. Was it your idea to incorporate Alice Cooper in the soundtrack and do the video as well?
I wish I could say it was. We had a lot of different rock music, that I had put in for the temporary thing. And then Frank came to me and said, we've been approached by Alice Cooper's record company that Alice would be interested in doing a song. And I listened to stuff on the album and I said, would he be interested in us taking a few songs? And it was yes. So, I mean, that was, my only contribution on that was let's put more of it in there, Teenage Frankenstein and Hard Rock Summer, as well as The Man Behind the Mask. The big irony is back in '65, Alice was in a group called the Nas. And in those days, I knew him as Vincent, which is his, real name, and, guy from Texas. And we all hung out at Frank Zappa's house, Canyon House in Laurel Canyon. And we actually played on the same bill at a club called the Cheetah. But to this day, Alice and I have not met each other in person. After all these years, things just keep, happening where we just, he's going to do some show, I'm going to go to, something happens, I don't go to the show or whatever. I'm hoping that, there's an upcoming Frightmare in Texas that I think they're trying to get all of us together for, if that all works out, because I'm just, I even sing Man Behind the Mask like Alice in our rock and roll band, the Sloths. So, I mean, I can't say how much more close I am to him and the songs and stuff, and still have not yet met the man.
I have a question. I was doing some research for the interview, came across an old Fangoria article that said there were originally 3 cuts of the film. The version you thought the MPAA would let go, like a harder R version, and then a quote unquote like X or unrated version of the film. Obviously, these movies are known for getting kind of cut to pieces by the MPAA. How close to what we see on screen like fits your overall vision of what you thought this should be?
Well, we went through 9 cuts with the MPAA, and it was getting down to just a couple of frames here, a couple of frames there. I purposely tried to shoot everything so it wasn't terribly gory. It just, was like, when he squished the cop's head, that, you actually saw the skull break up and see a piece of brain matter in there, and that got trimmed down to nothing. And then the triple decapitation of the 3 paintballers, those guys created this an amazing effect. How it went past all 3 heads and you saw the bodies drop and the heads drop, And, that unfortunately ended up on the cutting room floor. And we're just at a point where they just hated these movies and would do anything they could to, cut them back. But the thing at the end of the day that they picked on the most, believe it or not, is the back bend with the sheriff, where Jason pushed him back and you hear, his spine cracking and stuff. They went crazy over that. And it's like, there's no blood. It's, it's an old vaudeville trick, with one person's legs and another person's torso. It's, it's nothing. But they were saying by the time we get to that, the overall is just so intense that that's even worse. And it's like, okay, I don't know what to say, but none of the things that I had in there I thought were terribly, XX. I knew they were going to pick on it, so I did try to shoot things a couple of ways, but my first cut was pretty much putting everything in there and then let them start to, chip away at it. And unfortunately, it was, it wasn't like big chunks that were taken out. They were small chunks, and we've yet to find all those little frames, all the little pieces that, were in those sequences.
So those are almost lost to history now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It seems like that's a trend with the Friday movies. I mean, from your film to Buechler's follow-up, it seems like there's always a lot lost.
They beat the hell out of Buechler and Part 7. They really went at that with a vengeance. But I think he had much more intense, kills and more of a gore factor in there. And I wasn't trying to be, take it back. I just wanted the movie to be more dependent on the characters and the story and the the laughs and the hopefully the surprises of seeing stuff that you haven't seen in a Friday before.
Oh, totally, and it works well. Tom, we don't want to take up too much of your time because you do have your screening, and having seen the film already, I mean, Nightmare Cinema is amazing. I love that movie. But
great.
Speaking on the legacy, I mean, you said you kind of you were terrified. You expected fans to kind of like hate the risks you took. But I mean, all these years later, I mean, do you know? I mean, can you pinpoint kind of what it is that makes all these fans hold Jason Lives in such high regard? I mean, it is commonly known as one of, if not the best Friday the 13th film.
I don't. I want to say it's less about what I did and more about when people saw it. Although there's a whole generation that's discovering it now for the first time, and in terms of a fan base, it just builds every year. I'm amazed, but I think somehow he's more of a straight ahead monster, and I obviously come from a great adoration of the Universal monsters. And in the 80s, we didn't really realize it, but we were kind of creating that new breed of monsters with Freddy and Pinhead and Chucky, and of course Michael Myers. It started the whole thing with the slashers. It was just, Leatherface. I mean, there was all these people that seemed like to the public and for the critics in particular, really distasteful. But now they're like, kids have dolls and, it's all kind of cool. And you get these children coming up to me now. They're like 7 years old in the Jason outfit, carrying a machete they want autographed. So he's become much more of a, kind of beloved villain. And I guess because mine, sort of dealt more with that kind of fun, somehow that survived. And it's something I learned too from the silent movies. A lot of the movies of that era, are looked at now as being very melodramatic and boring, where the comedies, keep going. And there's something about entertaining people with laughs and characters that, have some wit about them, dry humor about them, that that doesn't go away. People love somebody that can, think fast and, take action and things. So, a lot of that kind of fell into it. And, the one thing I can share with you is, over the last 33 years, I guess I have been asked so many times about, will I do another one? And I keep saying, for years, well, if I can come up with another idea that's fresh, if I can bring something else to it, I'll do it. And lo and behold, I finally came up with the formula and what I wanted to do in things about 6 months ago. and wrote the screenplay. And of course, now I'm stopped dead in my tracks, with the lawsuit with John Cunningham and Victor Miller. So it's like I can't even show it to the studios or anybody.
Oh, jeez.
So it's just
Oh,
a screeching halt. But that's the irony, is that it took that long for me to come up with something that I went, you know what, I would want to see this movie, and as a horror fan and as a Jason fan, and that was a big thing to me, is that I didn't just want to do another one. I wanted to do something unique with it, but still staying within the structure and still staying within the parameters of what a Friday the 13th is.
So what do you think can be done now with characters that we grew up and loved in the 70s and 80s? Like, these are our Frankensteins, our Draculas, our Wolfmans. What can be done for modern audiences to keep them relevant and to keep them still scary?
Well, I obviously want to see tomorrow how Chucky fared, over, made a whole different looking Chucky. And I'm sure they intensified a lot of things from the way it was back then. Pennywise has become, quite a new icon of a horror thing. And that was obviously, based on something that was television. But it, a whole new audience discovered it, and they did one hell of a campaign to put that out before it came, and it, and just the whole idea of it, really sparked with people. So I keep believing that, somebody will keep coming up with something unique, whether it's a clown or a evil child or another type of slasher, that someone will have something about them that somehow feels original again and unique, and will kind of be, this generation's monsters. And you don't really know if something's going to last until, 10, 20 years later. Are people still talking about it? Are they still wanting to watch it again? And when that happens, you just feel so lucky, that it actually survived.
Definitely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time. We definitely appreciate it. And we won't take up any more of your time so you can get to your screening. But like we both said, we appreciate it so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you so much, Tom. Enjoy the screening, and thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure to speak tonight. Drive safe, and definitely let you know when this is out. So have a great night.
Okay. All right, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to the Pod and the Pendulum podcast right now. I am your host, Mike Snoonian. I can see Jerry making faces at me right now because this is take 2 in recording this episode right now. Jerry, how are we doing?
I'm doing so great right now. How's it going?
So we are joined by some guy named AJ Bowen. He's been in some shit you've seen. No, let's
Present.
give a better than that. AJ's
You don't need
been
to.
in,
It's fine.
Okay, you can.
I was in. You can, and I was in Creepshow 3. But not the whole thing. I was in the segment. There's a little wraparound that I'm in, but the main segment that I'm in is called The Radio.
Man, I am sweating right now.
It's a high art kind of thing where I act with an inanimate object the whole movie.
Okay, for our listeners, I'm just
It's hard
going
to
to
find, but it's good.
real quick. I'm going to bring up the speed real quick because we're all having fun here. We recorded for a good 12 to 13 minutes, and we realized that we weren't recording. So if we're laughing, it's because of that. So, Jason,
do you want to? Do either of you guys want to do a wrap up?
Yeah. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next
Mike
week.
doesn't like Mandy. I don't mean wrap
Mike
up the whole
hates
thing.
Mandy.
I mean to do catch up on what everyone missed.
Mike hates Mandy. AJ
Does
talked to
Creighton.
Adam Marcus once.
Yeah, Creighton Duke's dialogue in Jason Goes to Hell is some of the best dialogue committed to any. Other than Quint's monologue in Jaws, I would put Creighton Duke's dialogue up there with that, probably.
Oh, we've officially gone off the rails. This is great.
Oh.
Jason Lives is a good movie, though, too. So
It's a very good movie. So,
Okay, so AJ.
yeah.
How did you discover Jason Lives?
How did I discover Jason Lives? It's a complicated story, man. It's actually not. It's just I run my mouth a lot. So I was already infatuated with horror at that time. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Georgia, the suburbs of Atlanta. I was a military brat, and my parents were pretty devoutly, I say were, they're still alive, they're still devoutly religious. I am not. And so horror in the 80s, I was not allowed to watch. So I had to catch with my friend. And so I'd already seen Halloween. But the other thing that they did, I'm 41, so this was like the mid 80s. They had like a local TV station on Saturday afternoons. They would play edited versions, like marathons, almost every weekend of horror films. So before Jason Lives came out, I had already seen, I want to say, at least the first 4. I'm not sure that 5 had gotten there yet. But I had seen the first 4, like in a marathon, and I was obsessed with it. And my friend, I don't know why his parents let him have a subscription to Fango when he was 8, but he did. And so we would tear through that stuff. And we both ended up in Cub Scouts together. And this is the guy from the lost footage that no one will ever hear of us talking. It's my friend. He's been my best friend since 85, 86. And this guy and I went to Cub Scout camp together. And we went to a place in Georgia called Camp Daniel Morgan, a hard labor state park. And unbeknownst to us until the first night that we were there, it was like an overnight camp, like a 2-night camp thing. And the first night that we were there, one of the counselors was running around in a hockey mask, and it scared the fuck out of me. And I was a pretty sensitive kid. Like, I wasn't good at staying away from my mom overnight. And so I was freaked. And it was around that time, while we were at camp, that we found out that they had just shot a movie there at this camp that I was camping at, that I was going to scout camp at. And that happened, they had wrapped like a week before we had gone to camp there. And that movie was called Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. And I was like, I'm at the camp where Jason was, and I was losing my shit. And so I saw the movie, and there was something about, at the time, I couldn't know, like whenever we developed our love for like horror, it's almost difficult to sort of discuss it, because once you get to be our age, it's been a part of us for so long. But I would say that Jason Lives, more than any other movie, was what sort of made me fall in love with horror. And I didn't know at that age why. And then as I got older and I started making movies and I started learning about films, sorry, it's Red Dawn happening in my backyard, right? The original. It's the Russians. I would go back to it, and it's funny, I have a 5-year-old daughter, so it's really saying something for me to say that I have seen Jason Lives more than any other movie. I've seen it more than any other horror film. I've seen it more than any other non-horror film. I've even seen it more than Frozen, which, when you have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm not talking about Adam Green's, I'm talking about Anna and Elsa.
Yeah.
Fuck them. I'm so happy that another one's coming out that I'll get to hear about in Thanksgiving time.
I'm really right there with you.
Yeah, I know, right? It's awful. And my kid loves horror films too, but it's like she's just I can't quite show her the stuff, certainly not that I was in, that I've been in, and not the older stuff. But I can't wait. As a dad, I'm so stoked about showing her some of these things. But Jason Lives is a movie that whenever I'm happy, I put it on. Whenever I'm depressed, I put it on. If I'm up late at night and I can't sleep, I put it on. And I have it on VHS. I have it on standard DVD. I have it on Blu-ray. That wasn't enough, because when the mood hits for me to watch it, I'm not kidding, it's probably, if I'm being conservative, once every couple of months, but it's probably more frequent than that. I'll put on for a few minutes. And I saw it come on one of the cable channels, and so I DVR'd that shit. So now I don't have to even go pick up a Blu-ray or anything. Like, I just turn on my TV and I'm like, DVR, I'm ready to watch Dad get bent in half. I need that right now. But like what we were starting to talk about before you fucked it all up and didn't record.
Yep. Thank you.
So I've been obsessed specifically with that movie because it's such a different film than the rest of them in the franchise, in so many ways. And I've been obsessed with Tom for a long time. And I was at a benefit, God, almost 2 years ago. It's like for hurricane relief. I was at Dark Dells, and I was signing, and one of my genre famous friends was sitting beside me, and we were talking about life, and I was in the middle of talking to him, I stopped talking because Tom walked past, and Fred asked me, he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, that's Tom McLoughlin." And he's like, "Yeah, I know. Do you want to talk to him?" And I was like, No, I don't want to talk to him. No, leave me alone. So Fred basically stood up and walked me over like he was my dad, walked me over to Tom and was like, "Hey, Tom," and they know each other. And so they're catching up. And he's like, "Hey, this is AJ. And I think there's some things that he wanted to talk to you about." And Tom was very gracious as I proceeded to like give a serious, like a book report, thesis paper orally about why I think it's a perfect movie, why, like the choices that he made were so amazing. There's so much that we could talk about, right? I mean, like, which is funny because in terms of the physical Jason, it's one of the least interesting. Once he's out of the coffin, once he's walking around, the next time to me, and I'm not even making a joke about it, the next time to me that he's interesting looking is when the like garbage neck opens up at the end, when the propeller blade hits him and all of a sudden it's like weird gazpacho comes out of his head.
Yeah.
So he's pretty visually not that exciting. And it's funny because like I've said the same thing to Kane. Like I was like, "Kane, I love you. You're what Kane did with the character was Kane's such a gifted actor." And I think a lot of people, when they think about Kane Hodder, a lot of people aren't aware what his skill set is or how talented he is. And I would disagree with someone that's like, "Oh, he just hasn't gotten to show it." I'm like, no, he's showing it. There's just he's so good at it that people don't know. He makes it look easy, so they have no idea the degree of skill with which he was able to turn something that we were scared of because the movies told us we were supposed to be, or there would be occasional jump scares. And there's something scary about the hockey mask and the pillowcase, but like Kane made him scary for the first time as just this thing. When you saw him, then it's funny because like Biegler didn't have to cut away from him. If you notice in that one, like there's a lot of Jason walking, and I'm like, I would have done the same thing because every time Kane is Jason, any moment, it's terrifying when you just him walking. And Jason's not terrifying in Jason Lives when he's walking. The thing that's sort of terrifying is some of the stuff that Tom did by finally having kids there, having it be at camp, when camp's happening. And I think another big part of it for me is that if you're talking about like the principal characters, like I don't even mean just like Tommy and Megan. I'm talking about like if you expand that to Court, to pretty much all of the counselors and to the sheriff, they all get character arcs, which is very rare for any genre film because they can be a bit of, especially if you're talking about a slasher, they can be, especially in the 80s, a bit of like meat grinder where what we're watching is the tactile moments of gore or the scares or the jump scares, but every character is decent in the movie, the opposite of Weekend at Bernie's in Part 7, where I saw that one too, with a group of people in a theater, and hearing people cheer when you could hear the weed or revving up. You were like so excited that Bernie was about to get it, but you weren't excited pretty much when anybody got it in Jason Lives. You wanted them to pretty much all make it, even the people that were at the beginning, sort of like from a, if we're in there with Tommy and we're in there with Megan, then there's people that are assholes in the movie, sheriff and deputy. They're the antagonists. And even them, like when he says, "Megan, don't," when she puts the laser on his head, you're like, oh, that's a human being. He's not just some douche. And it has one of the best, for me, I didn't understand what it was at the time. One of those like sacrifice moments where someone earns our time with them as a character by giving themselves up. And especially now that I have a daughter, like that moment gets me so hard, because he was one of the only dudes that actually got away from Jason. And I don't know how he did it, because everybody's hauling ass trying to run away. But he was the one that was able to run away and just be like not caught. I don't know if it was his mustache. I don't know what it was. But it's also the opening when you're talking about like I didn't know at that age. I didn't know what I was in for at that age when I just suddenly saw Jason as James Bond.
Yeah.
I was so confused.
It's such a fun little nod. It lets you know right away you're in for something different. And I think it prepares you for this is what we're going to get. I think it prepares you. And you're either going to go for that ride or you're going to be like, fuck it, this is not what I'm here for.
Well, that's part of, I think, the magic of the movie. And AJ's right. I mean, no offense to CJ Graham, but Jason's not spectacularly interesting in this film. It's the surrounding characters that makes that film so great, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, no, it's like if you like, I talked to Tom, and I'm sure he, I'm sure he mentioned Frankenstein when you guys were speaking. But when you look at Frankenstein, there are specific moments in that movie where Frankenstein's interesting, but otherwise he's just a dude that walks around. It's mostly other people, and so there's this. It's almost this plot device, and the other there were things that were terrifying to me about Jason in the movie when he punches a hole in Welcome Back, Kotter. Like as a kid, when I saw that, I almost shit myself. It was terrifying to me. I was like, "Whoa, he got an upgrade."
Horseshack got screwed up.
Yeah, and it just was such an interesting. It not starting with the, which I always enjoyed, the sort of flashback update, where they're like, hey, because now that I'm an adult filmmaker, I view it as they were making 75-minute movies and they needed to be able to get them up a little bit longer, because they're not, it's not like they're complex pieces of, they're not really hard. It's not like Inception. Like, what happens. Jason walks around, kills some people, and then there's a final girl. So they didn't have to do here's what just happened in case you were confused about where this movie's going to start. But Tom didn't do that. Like it's just them driving and having a conversation. And I'm actually really happy on this side of things that Tom Matthews got to be Tommy. For me, I know there's always a back and forth, but I would say that like my three favorite films are Black Christmas, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Jason Lives. And I think that I love being a fan of genre for my whole life. It's awesome to see Tom Matthews in that role. And tonally, that his performance so captures what Tom was doing with the whole film. I don't think it would have worked with another actor from one of the other ones. No disrespect intended towards them, but there was just this. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Scream's derivative, because clearly it's not, but much in the same way that Halloween's not derivative because Black Christmas came before. But what Scream was doing that people that would you want to call them legitimate film critics or journalists, whatever, douches that normally turn their nose up at horror, were like, Scream's special because it's self-aware. And I'm like, well, back in 86, 10 years before that movie came out, Tom was doing that with Friday the 13th. I mean, look at Caretaker. Some people got a funny idea, said when he's directly turns and looks at the camera, he pulls a Landis and looks directly at the camera and talks to the audience about some people's idea of entertainment, and it was just knew what it was.
Well, even before Jason Lives, like a year before that, you have Fright Night and you have Return of the Living Dead. And I think two movies that kind of paved the way for audiences to be a little bit more, put their tongue in their cheek a little bit more. And you could still deliver like a really killer movie with that, but also maybe not take yourself so seriously.
Yeah. And like you mentioned it, like still deliver a killer movie. Like threading that needle is so tough, right? Because I've seen it successfully done so few times. Usually something is funny, or something is straightforward scary, or something is camp, or like something's sort of like neorealism. It's rare that a franchise does both. I mean, you've got like, I really love how straightforward and lean the First Wrong Turn is, and then Joe came in and did a hard right turn to where it's like a totally different vibe. Like modern days, I would say Happy Death Day to You is like suddenly it's an entirely different genre of film.
Yeah.
And Jason Lives, I don't believe that it went that hard. I believe that it was still a scary movie. There were still stakes in it, and one of the reasons is that you cared. You didn't want the people to die. It wasn't a meat grinder for these characters. Like it was not very chill every time someone ate it. Unless for me, I always thought it was funny that there was this weird yuppie couple dining at Camp Crystal Lake, and then they went to get on a moped, and that was funny. But everybody else, I didn't want to see die.
Well, it's funny because that guy of the yuppie couple, I mean, he's such a douche, and he's like the typical guy that's like pressuring her into sex, but acting like he's not.
Yeah.
So I mean, but I find myself saying this every single episode when we reference the final chapter. But I think the same goes with Jason Lives. If you take Jason out of those movies, you still have very good characters, like a good character-driven, almost like coming-of-age kind of film. And I think out of the entire series, Final Chapter and Jason Lives are the two that really utilize that. The characters are believable.
I was actually saying the same thing. This sounds like a joke. I was saying the same thing about Jaws the Revenge. Because if you took the haunted shark out of it, it's like a serious family drama.
Yeah.
And it's very well acted. It's very well shot until the haunted shark comes in. But what's great about Final Chapter and Jason Lives is that Jason's not a haunted shark. And he doesn't roar.
Well, that, and I mean, you and I, outside of this podcast, have had that conversation quite a few times. I mean, a lot of people aren't familiar with the novelization of Jaws the Revenge. So the haunted shark, I mean, they don't really know that there's like a shaman behind it. So I mean,
you guys gotta have me back on whenever you guys get through Jaws, and I'll talk about Jaws the Revenge and why that
absolutely.
movie's awesome.
I you know what? I think we have 13 other people that have asked to join that episode. So people
you should probably let one of them. I think I've already talked about it on a podcast for like an hour and a half.
I'm kidding.
I have 2 copies of the novelization. I do. Jerry, you come down to LA, I'll show you.
All right.
Oh, I also have Jason Lives. My kid's mom gave it to me as a present. Gave me the novelization of Jason Lives, and it was very interesting to read the end of it, and to where the idea was that that Jason's dad was going to show up. To me, it felt like what they ended up doing with Thorne in Halloween 5, the end of Halloween 5. Like that's what it seemed like where they were going to go. Like Man in Black, that's a real bad dude. But yeah, I mean the way that, I mean, you just know right off the jump when he gets electrocuted, and it's amazing. He's totally decomposed before he gets electrocuted. Yeah. And then when he gets electrocuted, there's worms and he's greasy. They're living on him. And I don't think that that's a mistake. I think that that's an acceptance of the absurdity when you get to 6 movies in where this guy supposedly can't die, but he's also died a few times. And then the last one didn't even have him in it. It was just, it's accepting this. It's not going as far as Farmers did, he's not going to space, but it's like, look, we know that this is absurd, but we want to try, like, my view of it is that Tom took the execution of it incredibly seriously. Like there's a lot of gothic elements to Jason Lives. And he probably spoke about that too, but like visually, the story structure, the way it all went down. And I also ended up going to high school with a couple of the kids that played campers in the movie.
Really?
Yeah. I was really pissed at them that they got to be in it. Because by that time I kind of knew I wanted to be, I knew from 1986 that I wanted to be an actor. I did not think it was an option. And so I didn't pursue it. But I was very jealous of Justin Knoll, who's like he has a great line in Jason Lives. So what were you going to be when you grew up?
Love that line.
See, that's part of the charm of that movie. The kids. I mean, that adds such a terrifying element to it. And as a father, I mean, like you said earlier, rewatching some of these things, they kind of hit harder. I remember, I think Fantastic Fest 2013 when The Sacrament was premiering. I remember afterwards, I came up to you and you're like, "Hey man, what'd you think?" And I was like, "Man, that's a great movie, but I probably never want to watch it again. I'm gonna go call my kids." Like,
He wasn't
when
bad yet. I actually made my kid at that Fantastic Fest. So there you go. I was so inspired by your conversation that I decided to become a dad myself. Yeah, I couldn't. There's no way. Like, I can't go back and rewatch Sacrament now. Like, it's too brutal.
Really? So now,
it's my favorite movie that I've been in, but but the end is a bit. It starts to get to be a bit tough. It's a parental thing.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
I don't like watching. I can't go back and watch. Is it Alligator? The one where the kid gets eaten in the pool?
Yeah, Alligator.
That gives me I can't watch that. I can't be watching kids get eaten.
I've softened up like dramatically since having kids. I mean, growing up, I wanted to see Faces of Death and that kind of stuff. These days, I can't even bother with that stuff just because it just doesn't sit well with me.
Well, also we're in a period of time, I think, where society is kind of going through an ugly spot.
Yeah.
And I kind of don't need to be reminded of how grotesque humans can be. I need stuff that's a little, just for me right now, and I'm sure it'll change. I just need escapism a bit right now. And I think that, there's always been a part of me that has been into that's been less into some of the hardcore stuff. And by hardcore, I mean, like, for real hardcore. I don't mean like anything that would make it out theatrically. But that's why I love movies. And Jason Lives made me fall in love with camp slasher or summer slashers. And remind me, Jerry, when we get done, I made a summer horror playlist that I will send to you.
Yeah.
The rules were that the songs have to be in a horror movie that's set during the summer.
Really?
So, yeah. But it's just been a thing that always fascinates me. I don't know if it's because I grew up in Georgia, but there's the movie that led me to Friday the 13th called The Prey that I saw. God, I had to have been 5 years old. I caught it on TV and it terrified me. It just messed me up. I think Arrow's finally putting out. Maybe they did already, or they're about to. Rob G just did. I was in Dad Zone, so I couldn't go contribute to the track with Rob, but he's got a commentary track on it coming out. And if you guys haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it because it's set in the woods. It's about two couples that go camping and then they come across something really unpleasant. And the end of that just fucked me up as a kid when I saw it. And it led me down the path of like the idea. I think part of it is, it's like the hot and cold, the peanut butter and jelly of it. Camp's supposed to be a safe place. When I was a kid, people still went to camp. Like, you didn't have to be rich to go to camp. And so camp's supposed to be a safe place, but when you go there, you hear campfire stories. And to me, the Friday franchise, at least up until probably till Jason Takes Manhattan up. So I would include part 7 in that, where it's still these sort of campfire stories. They're certainly simpler when you've got for the first 4, and then things start sort of extrapolating from there. But I just always, that was sort of the ambition, is like tell campfire stories.
Well, I could imagine the YMCA being really pissed off during the 80s. I mean, just like Jaws screwed up beaches. I mean, in the 80s, you have nonstop Friday the 13th films. You have The Burning with Fisher Stevens' balls hanging out before his fingers cut off. I mean,
yeah, I didn't know what vitamin E was for. I just heard him keep talking about. Was it vitamin E, vitamin B? I don't know. It was boner vitamin, right? It was boner vitamins. That movie's amazing until the end.
AJ, I think you said something pretty interesting a couple of minutes ago. You talked about being in the dad zone and pulling back like what your kids can watch. And at the same time, like when we were about 10, 11 years old, like we were sneaking out and seeing these really hardcore horror movies for the first time. Yet now that we're all dads, we want to somewhat shield our kids from that. Like, this is the Friday the 13th movie I watched with my daughter, who's 9. and I have
Jason
no
Lives?
problem doing it. Yes.
So you know what the thing about that is I was trying to like unpack it, right? Like figure out what it is, because for my parents, they were super religious, and this was coming on the tail end of Satanic Panic.
Yeah.
And so, and especially there was a series of murders when I was a child in Atlanta called the Atlanta Child Murders.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a guy going around killing kids that were roughly my age. And so I came up and I grew up in an apartment complex. So it just was this thing where it was like stranger danger was a very real thing. My friend that I watched this movie with, both the guys pulled up in a van and attempted to abduct us when we were about the same time that we went to camp. And you know what? It wasn't even that big of a story. The cops didn't even show up. Like, that was just how it was. And so my parents didn't want me to watch smut, I think. They didn't want me to, they thought it was wrong. And they couldn't have known. I've talked to them so many times about it since, given my chosen profession, because, you know, I've been saying for like 15 years that I know that a lot of actors, they end up in horror, but it was very much my choice. It was what I wanted. When someone asked me what I wanted to do, it was like, I want to make horror movies. I want to act in horror movies. And so it was always the destination for me. I wanted to make them. I wanted to write them. I wanted to act in them. I wanted to watch them. And what I figured out, I was like, why am I feeling this way where I don't want my kid, I want to control what my kid watches? And it's not from a place of morality at all, really. It's from a place of, when we were kids, we got to have this discovery, right? Like, we got to, like, it was hard to find. It was so hard for me and my buddy to find Predator 2. I spent 6 months trying to find that on DHS. And so when there were things that we liked, one of our friends had to find it, and we'd all go over to their basement, right? And we watch it 10 times in a row. And we had to sneak them. And today, with the internet and with social media, like, I don't see it's going to be very difficult for my child to get to have a childhood. They're going to not get to experience some of the stuff that we did. You know, I was telling Darby about when I was a kid, if I wanted to know something, I had to go to the library, and to her, the library is where she goes and people read her stories. And I was like, no, I used to have to go there, like a little bit older than you. And I did use this thing called a microfiche. And I would have to, and they would have, I remember asking for like 3 Christmases in a row for a set of Encyclopedia Britannica, because that's what you used. If you wanted knowledge, that's where you had to go. Yeah. And now it's just on somebody's phone, or it's just on TV. And I want my kid to be able to discover that. You know, you're talking about like protecting what they watch. Like, I want to make sure that my house, like, I'm certain that we're going to be moving out of this house by the time my kid gets a little bit older. And it's so that she can have the opportunity to sneak out. Now, I'm going to try to stop her, and I'm going to try to catch her. But that's, you know, like, when I was a kid, that was like the Holy Grail. Like, successfully sneaking out of my Staff Sergeant Marine Corps dad's house to go meet up with friends when I was in, you know, 5th grade. That was a big deal. It was a huge deal. And I want her to be able to experience those things. I want her to be able to remember the time. I don't want it to just be sensory overload. You know, like, it seems to me like a lot of people, like myself included, can fall into that habit today of just ingesting media, just data. It just comes at us. Like, I'll have my phone out, I'll have the laptop open, I'll have the TV on, and I'm not paying attention to anything, you know? And I want her to be able to figure out, she's probably going to want to make movies. Her mom makes movies, and her grandparents wrote Swamp Thing. They were big into EC Comics. And I want her to be able to discover her voice with that. And I want her to be able to find stuff. My main rules are, like, there's some that she can't, like, she already knows. She turned 5 like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and she already knows that there's movies she's not allowed to watch with anybody but me for the first time. And she can tell you what the names of them are.
That's great.
And it's just because I'm like, you can't watch Halloween without Dad. You can't watch Jaws without Dad. You can't watch Friday the 13th Part 2 or Part 4 or Part 6 without Dad. You can watch the other ones, I don't care, but you can't watch 2, 4, and 6 without me the first time.
Well, you know, you were speaking on how you want her to kind of sneak out and experience those things. And I feel like these days, a lot of the magic that we all experienced growing up is lost, even with things like going to the movies. You know, it used to be when I was a kid, I'd go to the movies and I had no idea what I was going to watch with the trailers, and that was part of the experience, almost as profound as the actual film I was going to watch. You know, I didn't know I didn't know what the first Predator was, but when I went to see Revenge of the Nerds 2, and it was playing with it, you know, I watched both of them, and it changed my life. These days, you know every single thing by the time you get to the theater. But, like, my son, Dexter, knows more about certain movies than I do, and it's, like, the genre that I write about for a living. Like,
my daughter is 8 years old, and she gave me she's never seen the Purge movies, but she spit, like, the plot to the Purge movies out, and I'm like, where the hell are you hearing this? Like, we have not watched those, and she's like, oh, I just hear things. And I'm like, yeah.
You know what's deeply frustrating to me is that my daughter is not afraid of Michael Myers at all. And when I saw, the reason is because she has, like, you know, when you're in a non-traditional sort of family setup, you have a lot of people that you call aunts and uncles that aren't blood relation, and you have a lot of people that you call grandma and grandpa, and they aren't necessarily, you know, like, one set of grandparents lives in Kansas and another set, my parents live in Georgia. And so there's people that are out here that she calls Papa. So she has a Papa George, and it just so happens that's George P. Wilbur. And so she sees, whenever she sees Michael Myers, she thinks that Papa George is under the mask. So she doesn't see him as particularly threatening. That's going to change as she gets older, because when she was a little kid, she loved, when she was a little child, she loved What We Do in the Shadows. I won't let her watch it now because now she can contextualize it, and it's a little bit different, but stuff didn't really scare her back then. This fall was the first time that things started really scaring her, and it was stuff that wasn't even scary. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to turn her off to this. I don't want her to have a complex. That's really what it boils down to, which is like, I want her to start discovering these things when she's ready. I don't want to force this stuff on her. But yeah, she doesn't, she's like, she knows because when I said Halloween, she's like, Michael Myers, Papa George. And I was like, well, he's not Michael Myers in that one. And she understands that. I mean, she went and saw him at like Monster Palooza. And so she met like 6 Michael Myers. And so it's like just walking around. And so to her, Michael Myers is like the mall Santa Clauses. There's a real Santa Claus, but the mall ones are fake. And and there's a real Michael Myers, and that's George P. Wilbur, and all the other ones are faking it. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I should probably be talking about Jason Lives.
I kind of like when our podcasts go in these, because I think, you know, like these are the kind of conversations people are not having around the movie. And I think like what we're doing is you kind of contextualize the movie and what it means to you overall. So I have no problem with that.
Last week we discussed A New Beginning, which is one of the lower films in the series for me, but that episode ended up being, I think, one of the like deepest episodes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like this is exactly what we're going for.
And also, isn't it interesting how things come back around? You know, like not just in terms of like pop culture, but things get constant reappraisals, and it, you know, much in the way that like all of a sudden my kid likes wearing 80s clothes, which freaks me out. At the same time, like 80s culture is big. I think that moment's past. We're probably going to be back into the 90s here in a minute.
God, I hope so.
That terrifies me. I'm gonna have to grow my sideburns back out. But she, like, similarly, I had an opinion about New Beginning, and I kind of assumed that it was the standard opinion about A New Beginning. And then a few years back, I think I first started hearing about someone like beating the drum for A New Beginning. I think it was like Phil Blankenship. Started talking about how it was his favorite one, and I was like, "You're high as hell, man. That's wedged between 2 perfect movies. What's wrong with you? Jason isn't even in that one." And I started arguing with him, and then I noticed that people had come around to like, there's a lot of people that will list A New Beginning as, I'm like Jerry. It's a minor one for me. There's this almost sort of like sleazy 42nd Street vibe to it. That's different to me than the camp set ones. There's just a different vibe to it that always seemed like to me, that seems more of a right turn. Not just that Jason's not in it, but if you're talking like visually and aesthetically, it seems like more of a right turn to me than Jason Lives did in terms of the franchise. And obviously they were trying to like, what they thought in their mind was right the ship, because it was the first time that they got a diminishing return. Instead of it getting bigger, suddenly there was one that didn't do as well as the last one.
Well, that was also the point in the series where you could tell, like Mancuso and company, they were kind of over being known as like the Friday 13th guys. I mean, they all wanted to do their own thing, and it's kind of like, and I don't want to get the Star Wars fanboys after me because that is brutal, but it's kind of like after the prequels, you could kind of tell that George Lucas ended up hating his own creation, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I understand why they would want to kill Jason off, but I mean...
Well, also you paint yourself. You get to a point where, like, it was for the franchise to live, they had to kill him so that he could come back as being undead, because it was starting to get to be a little ridiculous, you know. And you got like, you've hung him, you've hit him in the forehead with an axe and with a machete, like you've done so many things to him, and he just kind of like takes a nap for a little while. So it had stretched the boundaries. I think what ends up happening is it's like that was a very interesting thing in the late 80s when you've got like Final Friday, or you've got, you know, like you've got Jason Goes to Hell, or you've got Freddy's Dead. They were like, okay, this will get butts in seats. We're telling you that we're going to really kill this guy. We're going to kill the monster, to sort of hopefully reclaim an interest in it. But without that happening, you never would have had Jason Lives. And Tom's take on the material, on like the idea of Tom getting to do a movie, and this is what he decided to do, is I just feel like Tom should have made like 15 more movies since that one. And
hopefully he gets to make one more now.
Yes.
So one of the things when comparing part 5 to 6 is that Tom Matthews as Tommy Jarvis brings such a different energy to the role of Tommy than we saw with John Shepard. And you get someone who's like a lot more swashbuckling, a lot more of an adventurer. At the same time, everything that happens from the beginning of part 6 on, every dead kid from then on, is all on Tom Matthews. And that's...
You know, it's interesting that you put it that way, because when you look at part 5, there's an element of it that Tommy was like this sinewy sort of, he wasn't little, but he was smaller, like this like boxer, like he had this build, and Tom was a little bit more all-American. It was like a really solid, and Tommy was ostensibly one of the least interesting characters in Jason Lives. Like, it was him and Jason, and that's how it was going to be. But we saw all these other people throughout it, but there's still these moments. His ability to go in and out of broad performance and then heightened realism. There's some stuff, you know, like, I don't know. I think it's a really underrated performance from him, because he has to be able to anchor the tone, right? And the tone is something that Tom nailed so hard, because, again, it could have gone into something that was just people laughing the whole time. Like, I get pissed. I don't go to a lot of screenings anymore of old movies. The reason I don't is because I can't handle the audience. I don't believe in watching things with a sense of irony. I don't believe in so bad it's good. I hate that shit. Like, I want to go enjoy the movie. And so, but I'm also incredibly judgmental about what people are laughing at. So I'll be like, it's not appropriate to laugh at that. You're laughing at the movie. Fuck you. Don't laugh at the movie. You can laugh with the movie, but don't you dare laugh at that choice. Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm terrified. I'm terrified of seeing Halloween on the big screen for the first time. It's my favorite movie of all time, but I've stayed away from that because I'm gonna fucking stab someone if they laugh during that movie.
I don't think anyone would laugh at that one.
No.
Well, I mean, at the same time, last year, my wife and I saw Hereditary, and people were cracking up that entire movie. Like, people are just weird these days.
So I think there's a difference, though, there. I think with a movie like Hereditary, people often use laughter as a defense mechanism when they're so scared they break out in laughter. Because I noticed the same thing in Hereditary 2 with a couple audiences. There was one moment when the girl next to me, when she saw Tony Collette's character like clinging to the wall just in the shadows, when she first noticed her, she was like, "Oh fuck no!" and the crowd broke out into laughter. But it was that very nervous, like, "Yup, this is like scaring the shit out of us right now."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the intention. There's that one. There's the intentional laughter. I remember when we were, and this has nothing to do with Jason Lives, but when we were doing Your Next, I have a monologue at the end of that movie, and the movie we did before. That I did with Simon and Adam, we didn't do any of the written dialogue for that movie. We basically took like the structure, and Simon was great about it. Like we took the structure of it, and basically you have a bunch of people that were like improv based performers in there, people that had worked on mumblecore. I was a trained actor, but I've also done a lot of improv comedy and stand up. And so I enjoy, if everybody knows how to do their job, I enjoy having a very dedicated outline and knowing what the emotional beats are that we're going to get, and then sort of letting her rip. You know, we get one that we know we can use for the cut and then see where it goes. And we did that a lot with the movie before Your Next. So much so that when we did Your Next, like I promised Simon, I was like, I'm going to say exactly everything that you wrote. And I'm not going to cut any dialogue. And so I learned this monster of a monologue, and then it came time to shoot it. And I was like, hey, Simon, I feel like there's this moment, like, I feel like we need to lean into the absurdity of this character a little bit here. So I have some ideas for adding some dialogue. And he was gracious about it and was cool with it. And he asked me why. And I was like, I feel like if this movie comes out and people watch it like at a festival or they watch it in a movie theater, we're committing to how asinine Crispin is by like 85%. And I think that we need to go to 100%, because then it will give the audience a moment to sort of respond. And they let me do it. And it ended up having that moment sort of that you're talking about. Like literally I was sitting, I can't remember where I was. We were watching it, and I have this line in it where I added, which is like, I'm talking to Sharni's character about, like, I'm just so out of such cognitive dissonance, like with everything going on around me. And I'm still talking about working it out, us being together. And I added this line about an engagement. You know, I was like, I feel like we need to really go for it. And so that when that moment hit in the theater and I say, you know, like maybe an engagement, literally I heard oh, hell no. Like a huge, like, and I was like, yep, that's what I wanted. That's what we needed to get. And I think that filmmakers attempt to have those moments in it. And then there's other ones that are like so terrifying that you, like, I still laugh in 28 Days Later. I still laugh at a moment in there, and it's because it scares me. And no matter what, it's always going to scare me. There's this one little moment where he goes into the church and at the beginning, and he's like, hello, and one dude's head pops up with his mouth open. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so that moment is that moment, like what you're talking about in Hereditary, I think is what I had with 28 Days Later, in that moment where I just, if I was standing up, I would step back, you know, like they do it successfully sometimes in non-horror, like Spike Lee, Summer of Sam, when the dog says, I want you to kill, kill, kill.
Yeah.
I was watching that in Times Square the weekend that it came out, and literally a dude in the row in front of me, when that dog started talking, got up and stood in the aisle. He didn't leave, but he got up out of his seat and stood in the aisle. And I think that a version of that when you're watching it is to laugh at it. But I also think that there's this sort of too cool for school subculture of people, and that I don't think they even really like horror movies. They just wear the t-shirt, or they're really there for the social element of it. Like a lot of film festivals these days, they're not really about watching movies. They're about the party that happens in between them or while the movies are screening. And I think that a lot of those people don't even watch the movies. So then when they end up sitting down to watch them, they're looking at them in this sort of patronizing, condescending fashion. They're not really plugged in anyways, so that you get that laughter, especially in a place like LA where I live. Like when you go to the New Bev, like people laugh at Black Christmas as though there's something wrong with that movie. Like they laugh at stuff that happens in it. And I'm like, that movie's super, that movie is not a fucking comedy. You're laughing like there was a mistake made here, and there wasn't a mistake made. You know?
I think part of that might be there's such a transgressiveness to some of the dialogue in that movie that modern movies just don't go for. They just won't tip that line. That to hear that now, you're like, because you're just not exposed to it with modern film, unless you're really going deep into the underground. It's like you almost have no other reaction you can do. I do think a movie like Jason Lives, though, allows you to poke a little bit of fun with it in terms of
that's
the
what's
dialogue.
beautiful about it. That's what's beautiful, because they're with you, so it frees you to laugh at the moments. And there's still scary stuff, but I mean, there's just the other thing is like Jason Lives is it's just funny to say about a guy in a hockey mask that kills teenagers. It's so good natured. It's not cynical. It's not scoffing at its target audience. It's not above itself. It's exactly what it is, and it's letting you know, hey, we know what this is. We're all here together. You know.
It has my favorite bit of editing in any of the movies in it. The moment where the caretaker goes like, "What do you think I am, a fart head?" And it immediately smash cuts to like 100 kids going, "Yeah!" Like it's impossible.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from Tom's background in comedy. I mean, he was an accomplished writer on the Dick Van Dyke Show. I mean, this guy had such a huge history
and a
with
mime.
that. Yeah, exactly.
And so to me, like a mime requires so much control, right? And there's so I think there's so much control in Jason Lives. Like he knows that the timing of it is impeccable in every moment. Like, you know, to be listening to go back to the caretaker, you know, to be listening for the bottle to break. And when you don't hear it, you're like, oh shit, you know.
Well, Tom knows exactly what he's doing, and I think out of any of the Friday the 13th films, he's the one director that he kind of, and I hate to use the term rising above, because I loved this series with a passion, but Jason Lives is the movie where, I mean, like you guys said, you know exactly what you're getting, and it fires 100% of the time. Like it's just solid front to back. And you know, you mentioned earlier that you think Jason Goes to Hell has the most quotable stuff, but when it comes to comedy, I mean, Court and his, you know, this is great. Like I can watch that scene on repeat. Like my son, he quotes that at least 2 or 3 times a week. Like
this baby really jamming.
This is great.
The shot. But the photography too, like that, everything that you're talking about, like obviously I agree with, but in that sequence, the way that his eyes dart up, the cutaway to the rearview mirror, and then the cut back, and then the camera following his head as it goes down, that is some crazy solid visual filmmaking. And a lot of that stuff doesn't exist in some of the other like franchise films, because that's an element that there can be departments where there's lots of times, like as an example that I would give, let's talk about New Blood. I love that movie, but I didn't know that a lot of people don't. And as a grown-up now, like knowing that the date of that movie was announced and that Buechler had to like come up with a story and figure out where to shoot it, I know how the sausage is made. I know how long it takes to make a movie. And when you've got one that has that many visual elements, plus you've got a guy that's got to get in and out of makeup because that mask is coming off like 2/3 of the way through the film, that he was able to do anything remotely coherent with that movie is a real credit to him. But at the same time, a lot of like indie genre films or a lot of genre films from the 80s, they had a very limited window to get it done. They knew they had to get it out at a certain amount of time. So there's things that there isn't as much care taken with. It's more like set up, wide, medium, close, reverse, move on. And Tom's photography in Jason Lives is not like that at all. In fact, like one of the only other ones that has anything like that for me was like part 2, and it's not the whole thing. It's like that sequence where Jenny's running around the car and hides behind the Volkswagen, and then you see Jason. It's a continuous shot. You see Jason running up with the pillowcase, and then they have to run around the car. Like, there's a few stuff like that peppered throughout the franchise, but they're all over the place in Jason Lives.
You have that wonderful shot, too, of Jason tracking Megan when she's walking through the cabin checking on the kids. And it's like, you know, I think you had said before, like, Jason is not necessarily scary all the time in this movie, but, I just love that shot. And you're just thinking what's going on in his head at that moment. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that getting to watch him hunt, which we very rarely get to do, right? We usually see the kill moment, but seeing the hunt, and there's a sort of peculiarity, although, you know, Kane's Jason was like scary, but what I liked about CJ, especially when you're talking about that sequence, is like how upright and straightforward he walked, you know? And I also loved, to me, Jason was almost like a kid again in Jason Lives, because literally it looks like he has a moment of surprise every time he pulls a body part off. He's like, I know I can pop their eyes out, but I didn't know that I could just pull somebody's arm off. Like, he's discovering throughout the film that he's like this, he's got these new upgrades. He's like, oh, wow. Yeah, I'm super strong now.
It's the first time Jason's not really bound by traditional human anatomy and what, you know, he'd be capable. Like, we know he's super strong and super resilient, but now, because he's risen from the dead, he's taken that to a factor of 4, basically.
And there's these little moments that are different than the other ones. I'm sorry, I'll just say this and then I'll stop talking. But like, also, in most of the other films, you see Jason appear out of the water, or he's standing out like on a dock or standing on the land and someone's in the water, right? In Jason Lives, you watch him just decide to go take a very normal walk into the water. And they keep cutting back to him as he's getting into it, you know? You never see him really swim. He just decides, I'm going to walk out there in the middle of the lake and I'm going to kill that dude because he's a real pain in my ass. And you don't get to see that necessarily in the other ones, you know? Like, he's an aha. Like, you see it. They do a little bit because they let Derek go a little bit more brutal with it because of his abilities as a physical actor. And also he was alive in that one. But there's this zombie Jason as he evolved. Like, it was very interesting to me to see.
Well, that ends, it has that ending, and I think it's one of my favorite endings of any movie of all time. I mean, just the potential of what we could see with Jason is at its finest when Tommy is in the water. You know, he has the gasoline all around, there's fire, and then Jason pops up. Like, it's such an epic feeling moment that I think it was never captured to that extent in the films that followed.
Yeah, and then with him just being chained under there and just pulling, he's still trying to get whatever he gets. So it's not like when Freddy versus Jason is the one that I have a hard time with because of my love for Jason. Freddy was great in it, but Jason was wearing a painter smock. And he was super afraid of the water. And the Jason that was in Jason Lives was not afraid of the water. He was like irritated that he had a chain around him, but he was like, okay, this is where we're at. I can't, like, I'm just going to keep trying. I'm going to try to grab this guy. And I loved that. I loved all of the shots that they had in the water, and the shot too, like that you're talking about right after he jumps out when the boat breaks and you watch them go down together is amazing.
Yeah, and I think, too, what I love about the way this movie is set up and where it climaxes in that Tommy and Jason fight, I mentioned this when we interviewed Tom, it reminded me, like, I'm a huge fan of, like, 1980s WWF wrestling. And the way the movie is structured, it's very much like a wrestling feud, where you have, like, your two protagonists come together at the beginning of the movie, they have their conflict, then you keep them apart for basically 80 minutes. There's no Jason and Tommy interaction, so you're building and building and building up into that ending. And, like, Tommy calling Jason a pussy, and Jason reacting to that, it's like, okay, now you have, like, your WrestleMania type of moment. Like, it's classic pro wrestling booking, and it works so well here.
Yeah, I mean, he called him maggot head. Come on, maggot head. I'm curious if that was an improvised line of dialogue.
Well,
I've al-
one of the things about Jason Lives that has always stood out to me, it kind of goes back to the final chapter. I've always said that like the final chapter is the Friday 13th film where we get the Jason we know. First film, he's barely in it. Second one, they really don't know what they're doing with the character. You know, he gets a mask halfway through the third. The fourth is like where it is Jason.
Yeah, we now
Whereas-
have backstory.
Yeah, but when it comes to Jason Lives, I feel like it's the last film that really gives us that Jason. I love Kane, and he's awesome, but with Jason Lives, it feels unique, and it almost feels unique in the sense that that was the movie that they had complete faith in again. You know, they let Tom do whatever he wanted to do with that film. And starting with 7, when, you know, Barbara Sachs started producing, she hated the series. She wanted to make a Friday the 13th movie that would win an Oscar, you know? And I feel like Jason Lives has that kind of youthful energy that maybe Mancuso and all those had at the beginning of the series again.
Yeah, and also there's aesthetic things that help that, right? Where it's like Jason still has a more or less regular person build in Jason Lives, and he stops running. That was what was scary to me about Final Chapter. Like when I was a kid and they get up to the top of the steps and he's like juking back and forth about like which way is he going to run. That scared the shit out of me. And then suddenly in Jason Lives, Jason's just walking and he's like, I'm going to get there. He doesn't matter because he no longer requires sleep or food or anything. So he's just I'm going to walk there until I get there, and I'm not going to stop. And then when Kane came on the scene, such a big guy, such a broad guy, that it started, he's a bit more like a monster. And to me, monsters are always less scary for whatever reason. Even when I was a kid, monsters were a little less scary. I was never scared of Frankenstein. That wasn't the guy that scared me, because monsters, I guess because it's like they come set, you know that they're supposed to be scary, but what scares me is the ones that you're not expecting, you know? And I think some of that had to do with growing up in the 80s again, with this whole like child abduction being a very real fear. Serial killers seemed to be everywhere back then. And, you know, like knowing about Ted Bundy when you're a child because he's on death row, and hearing about the day that he's going to, like, as you're growing up with all that stuff, that is going to be scarier to me than a big unstoppable force. Right. What was so scary to me about Michael Myers, especially in that first one, is because you don't know why he's doing anything. He's completely expressionless. And there isn't, like, he doesn't seem to get agitated. There's just this guy that's going around killing people. Like, I think Chris Rock said it in a special years ago. It's like, whatever happened to crazy, just for crazy's sake. And that always terrifies me more. Whenever you start getting into long franchises, you start having to explain. And I think that that's what is going to be a natural negative response to like Final Friday. All of a sudden there's this Creighton Duke guy. All of a sudden Jason has relatives. All of a sudden it's not actually Jason. There's a serpent, not a worm, a satanic serpent that somehow gets into other people, and that's just not going to be as scary. And there's always seemed to be a redesign too. And so if you're talking about redesigns, like I really loved the design of Jason in New Blood, but I didn't like any of the design afterwards. It started getting to this thing that started to look like an action figure.
Well, there's that whole like, there's that decayed look in Buechler's film, and I think it's kind of like the, you know, accumulation of every film before.
You see it all on him.
Exactly. Yeah. Every single thing from every film before, it's there. Whereas everything after is just like, what can we do with Jason now to make him look, you know, scary?
Yeah, so now he was actually just a little boy inside of, like, I was so confused. Even in 90, even when I saw it when it came out, I was so confused by Jason Takes Manhattan. I was like, I don't understand. There's toxic sludge, and he's the Toxic Avenger. That's what, and inside of him is a little scared boy.
And it looks like bad sludge. It looks like bad paper mache is what it looks like when you see him without his mask on there, where before that, I thought the unmasking stuff was always like the really fun kind of stuff to look at. But by that point, I was like, not so much.
And Tom did that shit right at the beginning, huh? And you know what else I liked? For me, here's where, like, he's got to get the mask back, right? Whenever we
Yes.
have these iconic characters, they have to get their shit back, because they can't just do what they did with the first ones and be like, okay, well, now he doesn't have a pillowcase, so now he's going to find something else, and we won't show his face for a while until he pulls the mask up himself. But I loved the reasoning. I love why Jason got his hockey mask back in Jason Lives. I'm a fan of the remake, but that was one area that I didn't like as much. I actually would have been fine with him staying in the pillowcase. I know they can't do that because of the franchise, but I would have been down with them keeping him in a pillowcase for all of the remake.
Yeah.
Like, let that be another thing. Like, you don't have to put the Joker in the first Batman movie, you know?
Right.
Like, you can warm up to that. But I loved that it was a symbol to Tommy, and that he threw it back, you know? That he was literally being done with it.
And again, it's this idea that Tommy is really responsible for everything that goes on from after the 10-minute point of that movie.
I feel like you just really hate Tommy Jarvis, though.
No, I do not hate Tommy Jarvis.
I know, just
Play a lot of Friday the 13th game. Everybody hates Tommy in that.
We're trying to do a group Friday the 13th game with some of our listeners, except I am so terrible at that game that I think we're going to lose listeners because I'm just like the worst at that game. Like, if I ever get Jason in a group game, everybody lives, basically. I get 0 kills.
You know what's funny is I just bought that game, like, I think less than a month ago. I think I played it twice, and I'm just so awful at that game, but it's so, like... It's so great to be able to experience all these movies through that video game, like the map, every little thing. Like it's. I wish we would have had that growing up. I mean, we had like the Nintendo games, which were like so bad, but you know, it was Jason, so obviously you needed to play it.
I'll always remember.
Yeah.
And I said it at the time. I'll always remember the summer of 2017, because that was the summer that I got an Xbox. I'm like not a big gamer. And the newest I had, like, up until 2 years ago, I had a Nintendo 64, a Super Nintendo, and all originals, and my original NES that my parents got me in 1988. I still have it. It's in our living room. It's still hooked up. But I had been told about Friday the 13th. So I literally bought an Xbox One just so that I could play that game. And I had some friends. What was great about it is that I had no experience with that sort of stuff, with like online gaming. It seemed really weird to me. But my friends, like some of my Austin buddies that make movies down there, and then some LA people, we got together almost at least a couple nights a week, and we would play for like 90 minutes and all summer long. So I'll always remember 2017 as the summer where the lights turn off in the living room after my kid's asleep, and the way that game starts up, got the headphones on, and it was like being inside the movies. Like I really loved it, despite all of the glitches or the freezing. And also you could really see people's worst instincts as human beings through that game. Like there are people that you just boot off. You're like, I can't play with you, Scott Weinberg. You get too mad when I kill you. That's the
You're
whole point
vaping
of the
way
game.
too much while you play.
Yeah. Or they start telling stories, and you're like my favorite person to play that game with was my buddy Yarvo. He just had a movie come out, actually, Brightburn.
Oh yeah.
I was playing with Yarvo, and Yarvo was always playing by his laptop, and obviously we can't see each other. But whenever he was Jason, and he would morph to somebody, he would have music set in his living room, so that you'd be sitting there hiding, and all of a sudden scary ass music would start playing, and you'd be like, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? And then all of a sudden Yarvo as Jason busts in. And it was just like a real special, or it's like really unacceptable, like really inappropriate shit that he would find on the internet. All of a sudden someone's having a really gross conversation, and you're like, what is that? Where's that coming? What is that? And then Jason busts through the wall. You're like, ah, shit, it's Yarvo. And whenever Yarvo was playing a counselor, this is before they nerfed the game out. Yarvo, people didn't want to play with him. I did, though, because I laughed at how mad people got at Dave for this. But whenever he was a counselor, he'd have people, they'd be like, yeah, we're gonna get together, we're gonna do this, let's go do the car. And Jason would appear, right? And Yarvo's a counselor. Yarvo would turn and shoot one of the other counselors. And then he'd run away. And he'd say, I'm sorry, man, I'm sorry. He's like, oh, it was an accident. And he'd just sometimes decide if he was getting bored with the game, he'd turn around and just start killing all the counselors. He'd start friendly killing everybody.
Oh my God,
people hated Yarvo for that, but I loved playing that game with him.
I love the idea of him conducting psychological warfare in people while playing.
So he did. I haven't gotten to see Brightburn yet, but I feel like I don't need to because I just played Friday the 13th with him one entire summer. You know,
based on what you just said, yeah, that sums up that movie. I mean that in such a complimentary way.
He is a bit of a nihilist. He wasn't playing by the rules at all when we were playing that game. And you just all of a sudden hear someone talking about how to debone a chicken. He would find a tutorial on the internet about deboning a chicken, and you'd be sitting there and there's the music and it's quiet, and all of a sudden you hear somebody, well, now what you got to do is you got to get in there and you got to just take the wing, and you're like, what the fuck is that? You'd be terrified. It was terrifying. You never knew when it was going to happen. He'd just all of a sudden start. Or he also synced up one time the disco music from part 3. And it was before there was before the Jasons started having their own thing. You know, this is before the NECA Jason appeared. And so you're sitting there and all of a sudden, you're like, what the fuck is, oh no, it's Yarvo. And you could see in the game, people would just start scattering. Nobody wanted to fight Jason. They'd just all start running when they'd hear that music. And it's sheer terror. Sheer terror.
That's beautiful. Hey,
I don't know what that has to do with Jason Lives, but yeah.
Like I said, we tend to go in tangents and circles here, and I think that's a good thing. Like, I think our listeners know at this point, if they're looking for like a beat-by-beat plot breakdown of a movie they've seen 100 times, they're not going to get it.
Well, do you remember the Part 2 episode with Al White, the director of Starfish? Like, he asked that right at the beginning. Okay, so are you guys going to go like scene by scene? And we were like, no, sorry, we trying to advance.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions from our listeners. Should we try to answer these?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we got from Jason, hashtag Team Mothra. He wanted to know, since it's the end of the Jarvis trilogy, who was the best actor? Who was our favorite actor to portray Tommy Jarvis?
Oh Lord. See,
I mean, mine's easy. I don't like. It's not. If you're asking me. I can also be quiet. This is about you guys.
No. You're included.
Oh, Tom Matthews, without a doubt.
I think Tom Matthews is the best. I think Tom Matthews is the best, but I think for nostalgia purposes, I mean, growing up, I kind of felt like the Corey Feldman portrayal of Tommy Jarvis. You know, I think all of us were that kid. But as an adult, like having experienced Corey Feldman in person once or twice, like, you know, I'd have to go with Tom Matthews.
Yeah.
So I have not had the pleasure, apparently, of meeting Corey Feldman. I gotta go with. I imagine. I'm gonna go with Corey Feldman as my favorite Tommy, though, because that moment when he is jumping up and down at the bed for seeing Jehovah
that's what I was gonna say.
First time, it's like we are all Tommy Jarvis in that moment. I don't care. You know, every 12-year-old boy has experienced that joy at some point. So I think overall,
John Shepard did a hell of a job too. It's just to me that just never felt like Tommy Jarvis at all. Like he's great.
I also was confused
actor,
I was confused about the time period. I was confused about the time jump because there's this little boy, and then also all of a sudden there's this guy that needs to shave. He looks like a grown man. He doesn't look like a boy. And I was so it had nothing to do with him, but I was confused, especially because they had Corey in that little dream sequence at the beginning of New Beginning. So I was very confused, and all of a sudden there was this guy, and he lots of times when a character's in another franchise like goes through, and like I'll use Sarah Connor as an example. Obviously she's going to be different in Judgment Day, and you got to see how that changed her. But they were aided in the fact that it was the same actor. And so going from this bubbly kid and to suddenly being this like Karate Warrior, which I understood, but there's just something there that had nothing to do with Shepard, that had to do with like the thematic angle in the movie that his performance I thought was great, but Tom Matthews, to me, like, for obvious reasons, I was just like, yeah, that's my guy. That's my Tommy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And along those lines, if the Part 5 arc was well received and Tommy became the quote-unquote new Jason, how would the series be different? Could it have continued for another 2, 3, 4 movies?
No, I feel like maybe one more, and that
Mhm.
would have just been it. I mean, I love Halloween 3, but I could totally understand why people tuned out after that until they brought
Yeah,
back.
only because it's a one-off. That's only because
Yeah.
like we like it now. I remember as a kid, I think I liked it, but I just liked anything that I was watching that was a horror movie.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget seeing the posters for the return of Michael Myers. Like, I was like, yes, yes, yes. And it was, I feel like if they had Tommy for another one, there would have been something. They still would have ended up being Tommy versus Jason. It just would have been Tommy Jason versus Jason. Something would have happened for them to have to, like, he would have dug him up, or I don't know, something would have happened that would have made it impossible for them to commit to him being undead.
Yeah, I think Jason is too iconic of a character by this point to replace him. He really is the Friday the 13th series. So although it might have been fun to see, well, actually, I don't know, because like the end of Part 5 is so dark. I'm not sure I would want to see something with Tommy as the killer. I'm kind of glad that they really threw that whole story out the window for Part 6.
Yeah. With also still not being so disjointed, because it was clear that he was still in a nut house, I think is what Rorschach called it. It was like a halfway house. It was clear that he was at a home in the beginning of Part 6 and that he had left it. So they kept that, but it wasn't like he was under arrest, so they were able to be like, look, it could still have happened, which was like so it's that thing that they decided not to do with the new Halloween movie.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is now they have all these kind of fan films coming out. I mean, there's one coming out where Tom Matthews comes back as Tommy Jarvis.
Yep. Never Hike Alone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so interested in, since with like the lawsuit and everything kind of basically robbing us all of these movies, it's so refreshing to see these characters live on in like, fan-directed films.
Yeah. And I bet that all of us at some point in time in our childhoods wrote either a Halloween script or a Friday film or a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, or at least started to. Whatever, story.
I wrote Young Guns 6 and 7, and I don't even think there was a 3, 4, or 5.
No, there wasn't, but there should have been. I would like you to send those to me.
I used to, around this time, I would kind of lock myself in my parents' bedroom when I was babysitting my younger sister, and then pound on the door and scream Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees or they're murdering me right now, and my poor little sister would freak out and cower under the bed, and then I would go and write stories about that. So I feel like I could talk about this movie for days. However, I need to get up in a few hours to go to work. So
East Coast.
Yeah, East Coast represent. So AJ, tell me a little. I'm going to nerd out here for a little moment. Like, you have a movie called Maidenhead, which was the first movie that I got to screen in Boston. At the
Underground, right?
Boston Underground? Not the Boston Underground Film Fest. We did.
Oh, you actually screened it.
Yeah,
that's right.
I did a little monthly screening for 5 years. It's you and Michael Parks. And it's almost like an alternate riff on Martin, and it's one of my favorite things
intentional.
you've done.
It was very much I'm sad. The one that you screened, was it in color?
I think it's black and white.
Okay, because what happened is that the writer-director, he just wrote such a great script, and we had done a short of it, and I told him, I was like, if you ever get to make a feature of this, I'll help you produce it. And so we made the short, and then 2 months after the short came out, the signal got into Sundance, and so the heat that came along with that allowed us to get Maidenhead going, and it was one of those things where, because it was the first movie that he made, I think he wasn't confident about once it was done, I think he wasn't very confident in what the movie was.
Mm-hmm.
So like he went back and he would try to change things and to try to make it, I think in his mind, more people get it, because, I did Creepshow 3, but like 6 months later we shot The Signal in 10 days and we didn't know anybody. And so that was really kind of like a first movie. We got the financing for Signal. One guy wrote a $50,000 check because he heard that the lead of The Signal was the lead of Universal Pictures' Creepshow 3. Like literally that's how Signal got financed. He's like, oh, okay, well if he's in it, then we didn't tell him that Romero and Stephen King weren't involved, and that it was only that we rented the lot at Universal, that it wasn't a Universal picture. And so it stood to reason that like when it's your first real movie and it gets in without knowing anybody at Sundance, and then it's the biggest genre acquisition of like a decade there. It was the biggest genre acquisition, I think, since Blair Witch. At the moment, we were like, oh, shit, it all worked out. We're all fucking rich and famous now. And so when that was our experience, and Jim, the writer-director, he came to Sundance, so he saw that all happen. And we shot the movie like 6 months after Sundance, in like 107 degrees in Austin, Texas, for like a month. And I think that when the movie got done, the black and white version that he finished, there were some technical issues in terms of like sound. It needed to have some sound correction. But other than that, I think it was a really great film. I was really proud of it. And I think he got a little rattled when it started not getting in places. And so he started tweaking it. And one of the things that he did, since we shot digitally, we didn't shoot on film, so he put it in color and started submitting it. And I was like, it loses everything if you put it in color, man. Like I watched black and white movies for 6 months leading up to it to study how different the performance is. The type of performance when something's in black and white, it has to be different than when it's in color. If you're a technical performer at all. And so I think that it kind of got lost, and I think he felt a little burned about it. And he put up almost all of his own money too. So I don't think that it was, it's a shame, because I think that it's a really sweet, I think it's a nice counterculture movie. I think it could have had a good home.
It's a heartbreak movie. It definitely plays against type. I remember seeing it at the New York Horror Film Fest. I think it was the first time I'd ever gone to a film festival, really. And I'm like, I know we're going to, A, start doing things like this in my town, and then B, like, this is the first movie I'm going to show. Like, that was I absolutely adored that movie.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit, you have a couple things that are out this year. You have I Trapped the Devil, which is out on video on demand now, and also you're in Satanic Panic as well, which is coming out this fall?
Yeah, I think it's coming out either in August or September. It's going to get a theatrical release too. So
cool. Okay.
That's rare these days. Yeah, so Satanic Panic, I'm friends with Chelsea, the director, and I'm friends with Ted, one of the writers. And I had gotten an email saying, hey, would you like to come do like, it's basically kind of like a cameo. And I was like, of course. And so I grew out a mustache and went down to do, in my mind, like what we were doing, what the tone of the movie was not what they're making right now. Instead, it was more like a USA Up All Night film. And so I think that as it's playing places, I think that people aren't making that kind of movie right now. And I think that audiences some of them really love it, and I think some are confused by it, but like I still haven't gotten to see it. I know what happens to me in it. I was there when that happened, and it was nutty to be on set with like Rebecca Romaine and just some other character actors that I've admired for years. So I'm looking forward to that one coming out. I Trapped the Devil is one that we did like two and a half years ago, up in Wyoming, and Josh, the writer director of that one, I kind of knew him, and they sent me this script, and he kind of used to hassle me at Cinefamily back in the day. He'd come find me at screenings and be like, yo, you gonna come be in my movie? And was like, get out of my face. And so I got this script and I read it, and Christmas horror is something that I really, really love, obviously with Black Christmas, and just Christmas movies in general. Quickly to go back to like some of the stuff that you're talking about a while back about the way that things were when we were kids versus how they are now. And what I love about 80s cinema in general is there's this magical realism where they know that it's a movie and it's not trying to be cinema verite, and it's also not trying to thumb its nose at anything. Like there's this magical realm of possibility. And that's what I love about Christmas movies, and that's what I love about Christmas horror. When you put them together, it's just like a really nice aesthetic to me. And so I had never been to Sheridan, Wyoming, and they were really solid. They let me cast my friends, and I've known the other guy that was in it, Scott Poitras. We went to high school together, and we were in the Signal together, and he's a really great actor. And for whatever reason, he didn't seem to get the same kind of attention, like his role in the Signal, Clark, it wasn't quite as showboat as mine, even though he's ostensibly he's the other character with the most screen time other than my character. They're the opposites. He's sort of he's the vehicle for the audience. He's the heart of the movie. And so I wanted people to get to see what he can do. So we decided to actually switch up the roles. I was going to play Scott's role initially, and then we were like, no, let's switch it. And we made this movie for very little money over 2 weeks in Sheridan, Wyoming. And Josh tweaked it and played with it for a while. And it's sort of like a chamber piece. It's really different. Again, I'm fortunate in that, like, a lot of the stuff that I do, I end up sort of taking right turns. And I had taken some extended time off doing the dad thing. And while that was going on, had an opportunity to go away for a couple weeks and do this, so we did it. And it just is sort of dumb luck that like that's coming out, and then like lots of times with an actor, it seemed like there's a lot of movies, but they're really spread over 3 years. So it's like I did Dead Night, and then didn't do anything for a while, and then we did I Trapped the Devil, and then I did a couple of other movies that haven't actually come out yet. And then Satanic Panic we did last fall, and then the guys I did Dead Night with, we got together to make this sort of weird comedy that we're in the process of finishing up right now. But you never know, like I'm excited for people to see I Trapped the Devil and for people to see Satanic Panic. But I've been fortunate, like I've made close to 50 movies, and I would say like 45 or 46 of them have come out. Maidenhead was one that never came out. And then, like Jerry has seen one called Night Sky that I co-wrote, and it just
Drives me nuts.
Came out.
I loved that movie so much.
It's you never know, right? Like you never know what the thing is that's making people not want to program it at festivals.
Yeah.
And what especially happens is when you get filmmakers that are used to getting into places like that, if it doesn't, they start tweaking, and sometimes tweaking the movie, I should say. I don't mean like on crystal meth. I mean like they start tweaking stuff, and sometimes when you tweak stuff and try to trim it down, it can start to lose sort of the essence. And like in Night Sky's case, it was supposed to be this real weird road picture, this like platonic friendship movie. And I think there was some concern when that was a little bit weird and it didn't get in to a couple of the festivals that there was an assumption, I think. I think sometimes filmmakers can assume that their movie's getting into a film festival if they submit to it. They can get entitled about it, or they can also get angry when it doesn't. And to me, it's sort of like when your first movie that you've made is Creepshow 3, you get kind of pickled to criticism. And like, it doesn't bother, like people liking or not liking something doesn't bother me as long as I feel like I did my job. So like, there's a few movies that didn't get to come out. I'm real happy for Josh Lobo, the guy that did I Trapped the Devil, because that's his first movie. And I'm excited to see, he has a real clear idea of the kind of vibe of stuff that he likes to do. And I'm interested to see what he does next. I think I might be working with him again on it. I just don't know I can't remember if he's directing right away or if he's going to like produce. And when you're in like the independent genre world, like I'm not really an actor. That's what I'm trained to do, and that's what I do. But when I work on these, the only time that I'm really an actor, just an actor, is when I'm working with Ty. The rest of the time, there's, like I grip on the days that I'm not acting, or, like you're sort of like a producer getting the movie made, or tweaking the script, or, crewing it. That's just kind of, end up wearing a lot of hats in there. So
I could have a whole other conversation with you about being a dad in horror. Because my daughter is 9, and she's now, like, she came downstairs when I was watching The Thing, and I had just put it in, and I'm like, honey, I'm not getting out of this beanbag right now. So if this movie gives you nightmares, that's on you. And she loved it. She thought it was like the greatest movie she'd ever seen. Her current favorite is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3.
Of course it is.
So but congratulations on being a dad. It's the best. Little girls
are
the best.
It's the best gig in the world. I need her to get about a year older, and then I'm going to harass Jerry to bring his kids down. So we can start playing horror movies at night in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's a good idea. That's awesome. Yeah. She wanted to do Blair Witch Project for her birthday party in the backyard. I said, nope. A, not for another 5 or 6 years. And B, if you ever want to have play dates again, we cannot show things like that because your friend's parents will murder us. We'll never be able to have anyone over again.
Yeah, it's weird to take your kid to preschool and some of their parents have seen your movies, and when some of your movies, you have been a very unpleasant person in them. It's an interesting vibe sometimes, especially when your kid wears like Swamp Thing t-shirts to school.
Jerry, any closing thoughts before we head out tonight?
No, this has been wild. I think this has been the most off the rails episode we've had yet, and I mean that in the best of ways.
Beautiful way.
I'm so sorry.
No. I'm so happy about it, actually.
In summation, Jason Lives is a perfect movie.
All right, that concludes another episode of The Pod and the Pendulum. Thanks to both of our guests tonight, both Tom McLoughlin, chatting about his film Jason Lives, and that very cool news that he actually has another script at the ready. So hopefully we can maybe get this lawsuit figured out once and for all and get some new Friday the 13th movies. That would be goddamn wonderful. And also thanks to AJ Bowen. I loved his movies for a super long time, so it was kind of like a nerd out moment for me to have AJ on, and he is definitely welcome back any time. I loved having him on. Definitely a different kind of conversation tonight, and one that I really loved. Thanks to all our listeners, and once again, here's our spiel every week. If you're enjoying the show, drop us a line at podandthependulum@gmail.com, or just come over and interact with us over at Twitter at Pod and Pendulum. We pretty much respond to everybody, both Jerry and myself. We love interacting with our listeners. We got a few new reviews up this week over on iTunes, and thank you so much. I cannot tell you guys enough how much we appreciate that. It really does help new listeners find us, and we're seeing our numbers grow every single week, and every time we get a new review, we see the numbers like spike up for a couple days, which is great. So please head over to iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast, and just drop us a quick 5-star review if you think we're worth 5 stars. If you think we're worth 1 star, maybe go have a sandwich. And what are you doing listening at the 2-hour point if we're only a 1-star podcast? That's ridiculous. Next week, we're coming back with Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. It's basically Jason meets Carrie, as you all know, and we are super excited to talk about that one. So in the meantime, have a great 4th of July long weekend. Hide your pets if they get scared from fireworks, and we are looking forward to being back next week.